And we are live. Now, folks who have been watching me do live streams, I am, for you especially, live streaming from our ritual chamber. So, you can't see like all of the things that are like super secret, but part of what's behind me is the Keprian altar and one of the doors that we use for the shadow doors when the spirits come in and out during some of our rituals. Because I wanted to have you welcome again in our ritual space since it's changed a little bit since you were last here.
Hey, thank you so much. I am so excited to be on with you. This is going to be great.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward. I expect this will just sort of degrade into like you and me just like having a stitch and bitch, and that is fine. But while we have a little bit of organization,
well, we have decorum now.
Why don't you tell all the lovely people who you are? I know who you are. Many people know who you are, but just in case. And also those horrible bios that we always have to learn to recite every single time we're on.
I know, it's crazy. So I'm Christopher Penczak. I'm one of the co-founders of the Temple of Witchcraft, and I'm an author for Weiser Llewellyn and my own publishing house, Copper Cauldron, and I've been doing this for about 20 years. And basically, I travel the world and I teach and I run community here in New Hampshire, but it has a global reach with our online work. And I just really see myself, ideally, the kind of key word I use for myself is witch, because it's such a broad definition for me. And, you know, basically a teacher of magic, of healing, of consciousness. And that's really all the things that I'm focused on in exploring myself and like to share it with other people when they're interested.
I know a lot of people have been calling me the OG vampire, and I am both old enough to be like, okay, not a term that I'm used to, but also like tuned in enough to know, okay, cool, that means I'm cool. You are definitely the OG gay witch.
Thank you.
You are.
We were just talking about how strangely that gay witchcraft has become memed. So there's a meme of Pete Buttigieg reading it, which I'm sure is, you know, used for his detractors. And there's all sorts of other kind of crazy memes of Mormons going door to door with gay witchcraft in their hands. So I've become a little cultural icon for it.
I mean, I know you remember when somebody on, I forget if it was a senator or a House of Representatives, who was going on about like, this is like children, like lesbian women learning to be lesbians and practicing witchcraft, that like thing that was basically our version of a meme in the 90s, which was, it ended up as a bumper sticker and as like the little pin that you put on your jacket.
Right.
Those were our memes.
Absolutely. Yeah, buttons really were our memes, weren't they?
No, they totally were. Like we know we can recite like let's see, beware of the wrath of beware of dragons, for you are crunchy and good with ketchup, or like, you know, visualize world peace. Like there's a whole bunch that like I'm pretty sure every Gen X will be like, oh yeah, I belong to that subculture.
Yeah.
I had that one. I still have that one. It lives on my fridge. Right. For folks who don't know, I mean, just in case you don't know, I'm Michelle Belanger. If you've joined any of the Discords, you might also see me as Zosh. That's spelled like Josh with an X. It started off as an internet handle and a thing that, like, honestly, a gaming handle, but I had so many good memories with the friends that, like, I inhabited that character with when I was looking for a nice gender-neutral name. That one stuck. And I had so many people that I really cared about calling me that. So if you see people call me Zosh or M or Belanger, all of that's great. About the only thing that's going to get you the stare of doom is if you ever refer to me as Shelly Belly or something like that, I will probably send lightning to strike you.
I can't imagine anyone calling you that.
some very well-meaning, very white light new age lady at a paranormal thing was just like, Shelly, you know, in that parasocial, like, I'm going to be incredibly familiar with you and just, I don't know, like Yahtzee my way into thinking like what your best friend would have called you growing up, and I'll tell you that was not it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we're doing a Kickstarter. First of all, I don't know that I ever really want to do this again. This is a lot of stress. Like I'm scared. I am scared. Like we set what seemed like a pretty low thing, 666. Okay, also a fun cheeky thing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've been part of this on the edges, where I did not start off working in TV. Right. That was not really where I expected to be. But it was definitely a place that my activist heart was like, okay, this is a place where I'm doing good. right up until things started to change where I'm not anymore. Like it's such an uphill slog to get any kind of representation in things, and like we're watching that happen in real time. Like we're like openly where they're just like getting rid of their diversity directors and like just deconstructing whole things and
Mm.
pulling the plug on so many cartoons and shows with so much promise. And it really seems like the one thing they have in common is they are diverse or LGBTQIA in some way. And so like things have changed, and indie seems to be the only way to continue to do the work that I've been doing, which is, you know, pushing that envelope, like letting people know that back in the Satanic Panic, no, witches are not bad, no, vampires are not bad, no, goths are not bad. We look different from you, that's fine, some of that's by choice, but you know, get over it. It's, we all need to like get along.
Right.
So before I dig into like fun stuff with you, I will do the obligatory because Fen will make faces at me if I don't. So we have a Kickstarter. We're trying to fund it. We are in the last 60 hours or so. Like we are in the final stretch. We have not funded yet. This is a all or nothing campaign. So all of the fun little perks that possibly exist will only exist if we fund by the end of this on the 9th. So please, 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 if you can, go over to the Kickstarter link, pop in, open your wallet a little bit. Please also, because of my own heart, don't open your wallet to the point of hurting yourself. And if you do not have money, as I did for very, very long, a huge currency is visibility. So even if you think you only have 5 followers on, like, just retweet it, post it somewhere, share it on social media, because that helps with the algorithm, which currently rules our lives like Big Brother.
Yeah.
You can tell him.
I just have to say I'm so excited for it. I remember some of our earliest memories of, you know, book tours and us being at festivals and you talking about the shows that you've been on. And, you know, being on tour, I wouldn't necessarily always see them, but then I'd see a little clip on, you know, hotel television somewhere. And for folks who are not familiar with your work from that time, the only way I can express it, and I love you, so this is coming from, was the real deal. You know, like you'd see so many people who are doing the paranormal work or were doing the magical psychic side of the paranormal work and coming in as the expert. And it's not my area of expertise, but even some of those things publicly, I'd be like, yeah, that's not right. You know, and you'd come in, I'd be like, yep, that's what's going on. That's, you know, this is the real deal. And, but there was always a little of that not being able to be your full self. I won't say true self, but full self. You know, there's parts of them that they didn't want to put on TV for you. And I'm just excited about the show to see that.
Yeah, no, there were parts that would actively get cut out, like things that would happen. I think, so one of the things with like Paranormal State, they pulled me on partly because I'm pagan clergy, and one of their key approaches was you would meet people in their own practice. So whatever was going on, if it was a Catholic family, you would use a Catholic solution because that spoke to what was meaningful to them. Well, not everybody was Catholic who was reaching out. We had several pagan and Wiccan, and then sort of like that like grab bag of other that a lot of people
spiritual,
are.
but
yeah, spiritually eclectic. And I was the person who answered that and who would like sit down and be like, okay, so what is your belief system? What speaks to you? So we can put together a protection ritual or a cleansing that actually has meaning for you. And we had a pagan family that was in Ashtabula, Ohio. And I put together this elaborate, like we cast a circle. It was -14. The snow was up to over my knees. I still went out into their backyard with my big old broadsword and I cast that circle. I did the whole thing, and they relegated it to like a little bit of clip with the credits rolling. That's really the only time you saw it. And like they insisted, like they made it this big to do, and then it just doesn't make it to anything. It's just like it's an afterthought.
Right.
And experiences like that just made me like, we need more visibility. Like representation fucking matters.
And good occultism, good metaphysics, good understanding and ability to speak to people. And you're going to be in that space to be on a media, to be on TV, to be able to share that with people, I think is just so important. And I'm very excited to see what you do with this because it will be funded.
So I'm trying to like manifest it, but I'm also Gen X and a goth and very, very negative. So like I'm really trying to like keep that part of my personality just over here. Like go write mopey poetry about something else. There's plenty of things to like write an elegy for trees, and like leave the catastrophizing for the Kickstarter alone.
Right.
So now that I've gotten the Kickstarter thing aside, I actually, what are you up to? What's the thing that excites you with your practice right now? And don't feel like you're going to overwhelm me. I want to hear it.
Yay. Well, the thing that is most exciting for me is I've been studying a lot. I run the Temple of Witchcraft. I've been actually studying temple building and the specifics of the geometry that underlies ancient temples and cathedrals and any sacred space, really, and how to apply that in modern ways. Here at the Temple of Witchcraft, we ended up having wonderful teachers from a company called Energetic Geometry, and they're in France, and they travel the world mostly actually teaching people how to harmonize their homes. And the idea that many of our homes are energetically toxic because we don't know how to balance them, or we might build in bad places and have disrupted land and all that. And then when I got talking to them, I'm like, well, I think that's really interesting. I want to learn that too. But what I really want to learn is like, how do temples work? And you use all these examples. So I'm like, how would we build that here, even in a modern sense? And so we had them, Dominique and Karen, come out from Energetic Geometry, and they ended up building a really wonderfully energetically impressive but very tiny stone circle in what they thought in our land through dowsing, and they did much like we do with the remote viewing. They from France were like, we're going to have a schematic of your land, and we think this is the spot, and we think this is the spot because the water lines cross under here. And me and Adam and Jocelyn from our board of directors went traipsing through the woods, and we found a place that literally had a water depression on the map where they were. And like, that's full on. I'm always looking for accuracy. I'm always looking for hits. So when they did that, I was like, hey, they know what they're doing, you know? And they came out in the spring, and we ended up building a transformational circle there. And even people who come to the temple, or friends, or even family of mine, like my dad and folks coming out who are not super savvy with energy, they go into it and they immediately feel something when they cross the threshold. And when they stand in the center of it, they feel something going through them. And there's a technique where you walk around it, widdershins. And I know a lot of witches hear that and they think, oh, does that mean something, is happening? It's actually bringing up the vortex of the earth is their system for it. So you can literally feel the healing energies of the earth come out. And it's been really amazing just to get to it. So they've done classes on like dissecting Stonehenge and the energetics and the geometry of Stonehenge, to cathedrals, to Greek temples. We did a Hecate temple in Turkey just to kind of understand the patterns behind it. And then we're applying it to the land. So far we have 2 circles they've created. And then this fall, actually, we're going to be doing probably a temple to the planet Jupiter. Because in their system, everything's based on latitude. So if you look at, if you're looking due east and you figure out, if you're observing over the course of the year where the winter solstice and summer solstice sunrises would be, kind of creates like a rectangle. And they use the measurements of that rectangle to base this whole mandala on it. So the further north or south you go, the mandala changes slightly. And you use those measurements to evoke energies in your space, which is really been amazing. So we did a second circle that has 3 rings to it, and it was going to be like our larger public circle to do Sabbats and things like that. And we've got the sunrises and sunsets and of the solstices and equinoxes. We've got the moon maximums and minimums. Just a little fun fact, I think I might have mailed this to you or to Illyria, but Illyria's mom's circle in Western Massachusetts was used actually to understand the math in the class. And I was like, hey, I know the mother, the daughter who built that. So it was very interesting to see that come up as an example, but it was one of the best examples of how to calculate the moon placements.
Yeah, no, that was Joyous Judy's life work and passion. Like our house is full of photos that she took of the moon and of the sun, of eclipses, at different equinoxes and solstices at standing stones and other things like around the world. And it's actually a little daunting sometimes. But you mentioned like home harmonizing, which ironically is the name of Illyria's business.
Oh, wow.
Home Harmonizers she goes to people's houses, and it's, on the surface about decluttering, but really it's about getting a sense of the space and the energy in the space and improving the flow for how the people want to use that house. And Illyria is really intuitive with it, which a lot of people, when they figure out her pedigree, is like, an astronomer and a geologist, and her grandmother discovered dark matter. And they're just like, mystical? Yeah, it doesn't have to be like, woo-woo. Like, math was magic at one time too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the whole take of what I'm learning is that so much of it was intuitive in these earlier days. And then as we kind of lost touch with that, we went to the math to kind of back it up. So I think both of those things are necessary. Part of the training is going out and feeling and dowsing with your body. And then part of it is learning the math and doing the graph paper. And then once you know how to do that, doing it on the computer and setting up that way. But it's been amazing. I look forward to my next in-person with Illyria so we can douse houses together.
Yeah, no, I can't. I just want to just, when you're not running a wedding for us,
Right.
having time to sit down and do stuff. I want to actually do a Kickstarter thing because I think that, oh my goodness, we are at 59. We're encroaching on 60. We are 88% funded. Whoever, all of you who did that, like within the course of just talking, like, oh my God, my heart. I have hope. My dark, shriveled little Gen X heart is beginning to think that we'll actually be able to make this, which would be nice.
Absolutely.
Always live on the bright side of life. We try.
Well, we've seen some stuff in the world, and that,
yes.
but I try to keep hopeful. I think it's tough. My pragmatist side has to balance out reality and my experience versus what I hope and what I vision and what I magic. But I am very hopeful for this project for you because I want to see it.
The hard part, honestly, with the Kickstarter has been that first season's happening no matter what. Like we got together last fall and we filmed stuff, and you are actually one of the few people who will understand exactly what I'm talking about. I won't spoil it for other people, but Fen came to me having read the Psychic Vampire Codex and feeling a resonance and being like, but vampire, what's going on here? And I was like, well, how deep are you willing to go in that rabbit hole in asking the questions about who you are, where you come from, what this means? Oh, you also want to film it? You know what? Sure, the world's on fire. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Gives us a certain freedom when the world's on fire.
I did a past life regression live on film for them.
Oh, wow.
I gave Lonnie Scott, who's kind of a big deal with the truth, and a very, very good, very responsible hypnotherapist, knowing the potential problems with hypnotherapy for past life recall. The agreement was like, I will give you like 3 or 4 keywords to just prompt me. I'm not going to tell you anything about what you're trying to get me to remember. I know what it is. I have a lot recorded about this. I got a lot of things corroborating this, but there are a couple of things that I'm a little too invested in my conscious self to fully, like, I think that there's pieces that like I'm blocking just because of trauma and the way memory works. Oh, hey, Lonnie. No, really, you're awesome. I love you. You're fantastic. And I look forward to continue. I recommend you for pretty much everything. I would not have. Christopher understands what kind of a trust fall that was. Yeah. So we went back to a way back. And there were some revelations and some words and some things that came out. And that's going to be a part of this. And that's terrifying for me because it's always been very like, hey, vampire is the easiest word. And when vampire is the easiest word, it's a very deep well.
That's very true.
And you're one of the few people who knows it knows.
And I look forward to seeing more of that and talking more of your time.
The journey was, we're both teachers. We've been doing this for decades. So we've all like been there as the guidepost, as the hermit holding the lamp, as somebody's going through that process and coming to understand who they are and what the language means and what it doesn't mean. And like sort of shifting their paradigm and realizing, like, as they go through that awakening and light a candle and then realize that actually they're in a cave full of candles and it's a very, very big cave.
Sometimes literally.
yeah, literally. And Fen, I don't know if it was foolhardy or brilliant, but their way of documenting it was on film. I mean, most people journal,
right?
But Fen's media is film, and really it's incredibly raw, and we don't normally get to see no holds barred, no veils, no anything. Just this is what this looks like.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's real, it's messy. I'm sure some people are going to find it terribly boring because it's not what they expect. But the key thing is like we are part of the paranormal. Like that's been my big problem with the ghost shows is like and also why so many of my witchcraft, occult, and pagan friends initially were like, why are you doing this on this television show? Like, is it just for attention? When it's for practitioners, there's no question that they're spirits. We work with that all the time. Like you feel it, like it's a gnosis, like it's a fire in your mind.
Right.
And for the paranormal, they're still trying to see, could it exist? Is it possible? Is the world maybe gloriously bigger than we've been told? And we don't usually get to see on the shows the very human element of that journey of coming to realize that it's not just that we're chasing something to see if it's out there, to take a photo or to measure it. We're already a part of it.
Well, I think it really shifts the paradigm between, that old science view of the laboratory is separate from the scientist to the idea that whatever you're experiencing, you're affecting the outcome of it. And you're a part of that outcome because you're a part of that system. Steve talks a lot about when we're teaching in the temple, like it's great to have spirits and guides and angels and all the things you invoke, but you're a spirit too. You just happen to be in a body. And just as spirits have power that are outside of a body, you have a different type of power inside a body. And I'm fascinated to see what you guys are going to be putting forward, because I know for me, I don't always gravitate towards the ghost only shows because like that's just default for me. Like, yep, they're ghosts. I get it. But I want to know the ghost story a little bit more. I want to know why they're there. I want to know the human side of the ghost. I want to know what in the people in the place triggered that, or why they interfaced with it, or are they having problems because they perceive and they have ability, and is there something about their energy and their magic that triggers things? So I find that really a fascinating part of it too. And for me, it's not just paranormal, it's all metaphysics, it's all occult, it's all consciousness. So I like to explore all that and see all that.
And it's not just ghosts, which, television, I mean, we both also come from, the entertainment industry, and it's about stories and scripts and things, and kind of neatly packaging a thing for a brand or for the expectation of the audience. So even on the shows that I can personally say nothing is faked, I was there, like I would know, and I would walk off the set. A couple of us like make sure that's in our contract, like we will not. But when it comes to editing, the networks really have a hard time trusting that their audience would be okay with the idea that it's more than just ghosts or demons. I mean, they love demons.
Even so.
Oh my God. But like when I would be like, well, I think it's fairies. And like, I'd just get this look and I'm like, what? And I'd go on, the expected dissertation of somebody who's descended from Irish American people of like, this is what this is. And they're like, could we call it like something else? Or like, because people are like, well, they're just going to think it's Tinkerbell. And I'm like, oh, that's your first mistake.
Well, what a great opportunity to educate people while we're on TV.
Right? Like that is your first mistake. And also, life would be much, much improved for these people if we just learned a few fairy rules and stopped pissing in their territory. It'd be great.
Yeah, just there's such a range of spirits that people can be working with and understanding, or just whether you're working with them or not, you're cohabitating with them because you're in the world. And to realize that it isn't just in that fixed paradigm of ghosts or demons or, things like, and also sometimes it can be energies. Like for me, I'll tell you, doing the work that we do, I don't do it particularly on film or media, but I get called for the haunted house, and that's been something for years. And I'd say a good 75% of them are no spirits. It's just weird energy.
Yeah.
Figuring out what's the weird energy people are reacting to,
Yeah. Sometimes. Oh, this is a good question. This is from Lonnie. Christopher, in your soul model, what part would be most likely to be the ghost encountered here? Oh, that's a brilliant question. Oh, okay, yeah.
I would say in terms of my experience looking back on it all, because I didn't always use the 3 soul model, but I would say a lot of them are middle soul sort of echoes. I'd say I don't always get consciousness, deeply when it's attached to a place. And I think then it depends on what that person's keen into, but I'd say mostly it's the higher soul or the lower soul. Mostly the middle soul or the lower soul. Usually the higher soul's not trapped. So a lot of times people will think, what can we do for this poor soul, when they just have a very binary view of consciousness. and trying to explain, even in my view of souls as it gets more complex, I'm like, is there 9 souls? Is there 12 souls? Is there, there's so many parts of consciousness. But something gets caught up in things, but usually it's not the highest aspect or the most immortal aspect. I think those are amazing to speak with in other contexts, but I don't always see them attached to a place due to trauma.
The idea that there are more than one soul, or that there are aspects of soul, like, that is so far beyond the pale for your regular show that
Yes.
most people are just going to be like, what are you talking about? And I'll default to, like, I put on my academic hat and, like, well, in ancient Egyptian mythology,
Right.
you had the body soul, the ka, which was was the echo of the person, was what you were feeding in the thing. But you also had the ak that, like, flew off and was the immortal part, and the ba that was, like, the migratory bird, but also the life force. And then, like, you just sort of, like, watch their eyes glaze over, and I'm like, okay, well, it's complicated, is what I'm saying.
I usually start with more, because my background before this was Catholic. So if I'm dealing in this area, has a lot of folks who call on me are Catholic. I'll be like, well, do you believe in a spirit? Yes. Do you believe in a soul? Yes. Do you believe that you have a body? Yes. Okay, well, I'm just calling those different souls. But, let's talk about what those mean. And that's usually a good first starting place for people. Although most people equate spirit and soul as the same thing. And we don't even agree in those words in English context what they mean. But at least there's 3 of them.
Yeah, I've broadly gotten folks in the paranormal to kind of, like, accept the taxonomy of, like, the construct or the imprint, the memory ghost,
Right.
which looks like the person is an echo of their emotions, and basically their fingerprint left behind,
Right.
that can be mistaken for them. It certainly may work in patterns, like a script,
Exactly.
almost like AI, or stuff saved to the hard drive that didn't quite get saved over when they moved on. But they themselves, the essence that is them, that is maybe in a new rebirth, maybe off guiding some family member, possibly doing both, because that can happen, and it's a little brain breaking when it does, isn't necessarily them as we think of as them. Like, and it's not, they're not in any pain because that's there. The example that I use for that is Gettysburg Field is actually any haunted battlefield.
Right.
Is something that, all the way back, Greeks, Romans, people will report seeing the battle play out over and over and over again. And if you have a very reductionist binary idea of body and soul, the only conclusion is that those soldiers are locked in the worst day of their lives forever. And that all of the tourists going there are just watching their misery over and over and over again. And these consciousness. But the thing is, that's not the case. It's the intensity of the moment itself is what's haunting the place.
Right. It's like that scratch in the record imprinted. Yeah.
Yeah. The emotion. And, we can pick up that, we can step into that, even if we're not what we consider psychic. But whoever those people were, with a few notable exceptions, they're long gone.
Right.
They've moved on.
It's interesting you brought up that example for Gettysburg. So I've had a very supportive family, thankfully, for a lot of my work, and my parents have been very supportive in their son becoming a witchcraft author, or a rock star before that, or a heavy metal singer. But my dad, one of his profound ways of kind of getting into this is he had an experience of the battle replaying at Gettysburg just for a moment. But he was in one of the fields where a battle was, because he likes war history and things like that, and felt the rushing of the soldiers come by. And so years later, my mom's passed. Now my dad and I go on vacations every year together. And so one year we chose Gettysburg and Virginia, and doing all these historic things. And we're back on that battlefield. He wanted to go right back to the same place. And he's like, I don't feel it now. And I was like, yeah, Dad, it depends on what triggers it.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting. The whole idea of the paranormal for him has been something for him to investigate and be open to. But I think it's opened a dialogue between us in terms of magic and mysticism and spirituality. Now we talk about life after death and hauntings and cryptids and all sorts of things you would not think a typical, New England elderly dad would be into.
And yet, no, I admire the relationship you have with your dad, and just watching that from afar.
Thank you. He's been a good guy. Yeah.
No, it's
incredibly supportive in what we do at the temple here too. It's been fun to watch. He actually has more friends, I think, amongst the folks in the temple than sometimes I do, because he'd be like, "I want to lunch with so and so." I was like, "Oh, I've not seen them in years," but
no, that's awesome. awesome though.
Yeah.
And I mean, just for people who are listening, the Temple of Witchcraft is a real location in New Hampshire, Salem, New Hampshire, not Salem,
Salem, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yes. The
Although
other Salem with the stone circle.
yeah, they're within a fairly easy drive of one another.
Yeah.
But like, it's worth looking into, and looking into Temple Fest if you like. If you are able to travel and you really want an amazing learning experience with some like truly diverse, brilliant minds, that is something that you should look into. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, we're back to in person, and we're going to be in Equinox weekend this September, and then probably next year will be Labor Day weekend for those who like to plan in advance. But yeah, we try to do a 3 or 4 day festival every year, and now that things are a little bit better, still uncomfortable for some people traveling, and I get it for myself too, but we're back to in person for that. And we also do an online festival every year in February called Temple Hearth. And it's particularly built to be online and to reach out to our international students, because we've got an online school. So we've got folks everywhere. I was actually just talking to one of our high priests who lives in Italy, who lives in Venice of all places. And we're like, we need to do a retreat in Venice. How, you want to set that up for us? So
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
We just did the HK Gather, and it was the first in-person one after everything. And I am pleased to report enough time has passed that I can say this definitively: 0 infections.
That's awesome.
Just everybody was good. Like, we had, pretty strict protocols, but it worked. And that makes me confident that it is a thing that is possible going forward in this very new, untried world that we live in, that is just constantly changing around us. Well, let's see. We are at 59,388.
That is
so
awesome.
Close to 60. I can taste it. I don't know if you saw some of the stretch goal things, but I think my favorite one is at the start of Pride Month. Of course, that meme went around where like the alt-right was trying to like shame us by saying like Pride Month, but it spells demon. In the same way that when we lived back with Procter and Gamble and they had that moon and they were like, this is a clear indication that there is a great like ritual sort of conspiracy, and Procter and Gamble are actually Satanists. We're like, all the satanic panic stuff has just come back. Well, Kat, our resident artist and badass, immediately just went to the drawing board and drew like this little like trans demon with her skirt blowing up.
That's awesome.
And that is going to be a t-shirt that folks can get for one of the stretch goals. Or sorry, one of the tiers, not even one of the stretch goals, as long as it thing like that is a thing that exists. I have also people wanted magic things, and I'm like, I don't do a lot of like magic with objects. I mean, I guess the Keefe counts.
Yeah.
And my kitchen witchery does, but not in the sense of like making little spell bags or things. Like, that's never been really my thing. But we were collecting the cat's whiskers.
I saw that. I think that was my cheer.
Yeah. And so we have a whole drawer full of cat's whiskers because Griff was making wands with them, and then Griff kind of hit a slump. He's got long COVID. And so like just trying to like find his new normal again has been a thing. Yes, there we go. Like, really awesome. Look at that.
She did a spectacular job with that. That's awesome.
And Kat is, I cannot tell you, Kat's magic is amazing. They can just, I have an idea, boom, boom, and here it is. And suddenly you just have art, and it's just amazing art. Kat worked for a company that she can't even talk about some of the people that she made art for, but I know. And occasionally like I'll go to the you go and shop, and I'm like, hey, I think Kat made the logo for that. I'll have to check. Cool. But yeah, I'm very, very proud. Kat's a student who has become a fantastic teacher. So she's probably back there being like, because she's running the stream back here, but she's pretty darn cool.
I think there's some drawings from your wedding I never got from Kat. We're going to have to talk about that.
Oh yeah, well, we need to make sure that happens.
Yeah. In a magical night afterwards, she started sketching me and Steve and Adam of just our energy body type stuff, and it was fascinating. So yeah, we'll chat about that. I forgot about that.
Working with Kat through that was one of the most gratifying like teacher-student relationships I had, because so you'll appreciate this. Kat came into my orbit through another friend who she ran into at a party, and like he was talking about something, and she leapt through him to read me because she could tell like there was something else attached to him. And she was just like, "What's that?" And like there's just sort of like this bing bing bing, like the doorbell goes off here, and I'm like, "What is that going on?" And she starts drawing. And it's early cell phone days, so he sends this picture. He's like, "What do I say?" I'm like, "Send her my way. Obviously, she knows something. Like, let's just go from there." But the energy body portraits, which are I think part of a stretch, one of the goals at this point. I don't remember. Don't quote me on it. I'm kickstarted out. I'll be honest. Like I'm just like, please just let it end. Like let us fund. Not to be negative, but like this is a lot.
Absolutely.
Watching her develop her language, because it's, you know, magic isn't just something you can pick up a book and everybody else's formula is going to work for you. So I don't know, that was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
Oh, another thing that let's talk about fairies.
Sure.
Are you willing to share a little bit? I heard through the grapevine about a really cool experience that happened on the temple grounds with like sort of stations of the Fae, like going out and meeting stuff in your woods.
Sure. Yeah, I'd
Are
be
you
happy to
willing to talk a little
about
bit
that.
about some of that with you? Like I am just fascinated. This is purely self-interest, but I know that people will probably also be interested in it because fairies and fae folk come up in some of our things.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a bigger story. So I'm going to take it back to pre-temple having land. We were just founded in 2009 is when we did all the legal stuff to, you know, go forward in the ways that we did. And I was living in Merrimack, New Hampshire at the time, a little tiny condo with Steve and Adam, and ended up having a very profound, and I always like to share this part because people think they have to be in the deep woods. People think they have to be someplace special to have something life-changing happen, and it can be in your backyard. It can be in your bedroom. You know, like some of my most profound experiences have happened in my bedroom for magic. But I was in the backyard on a little porch and just meditating with the land spirits in the garden, and had a very profound fairy contact just sort of well up out of the ground. And it was this very, you know, we have this kind of the European Celtic Isle image of the Fae, and it was not that. You know, it was very wild. It was very almost lycanthropic, you know, in terms of animalistic kind of views. But definitely a regal queen kind of coming through, little kind of native indigenous Sabanaki kind of things. That's the area that we're in. But definitely not what you think of as traditional British fairy queen, but definitely fairy queen came through. And it was very blunt. It was very like, and literally like face made out of the soil to my face. Was not, you know, profound vision of traveling or journeying any place. It was very blunt, very in my face. And said, we need you to build stronger contacts between your people and the fairy races. This is needed. And if you do that, we will help you with all the physical resources that you need. And, you know, one of those stupid moments where you should have probably asked for a lot more contact and a clear contract. I was like, yeah, you know, I was like, sure, that sounds like a great deal. And we said yes, and then just disappeared. And then occasionally would pop up in meditations, and then occasionally would start popping up in other members' meditations, and they didn't know the story, but they'd describe her. And I was like, oh yeah, that's like, I know who that is, you know?
That validity, like that.
Yeah. And same essence, same personality. Sometimes it would visually look a little differently, but the essence would come through. And then we started a practice at Temple Fest where we have a teaching called the Three Rays. So in the Three Rays, we kind of, the keywords to them are will and love and wisdom. So we'd start kind of cycling through them for the focus for Temple Fest. And so for the next love ray year, love deals with the fairy races, nature, plants, flowers, herbal magic, that type of stuff in our system. And we decided to dedicate that year to the fairy queen and her court. And we'd start doing a lot of magical work of connecting to like a whole court of entities that were associated with her. And I have the old occultist view of fairies that there's sort of like a hive mind. So she's like the queen bee, and there's the other workers in various levels. And so, you know, we started working with them a little bit more. We strangely, and talking about how devotion changes and it's not always the old ways, we put her on a t-shirt. So that was the t-shirt that year. And it was very kind of primal rock and roll line art type of t-shirt. It wasn't, high end that we look at today with very colors and, for ink blot and all that. So it was just very primal black and white. I think it was purple and yellow. And we did a whole ritual that was called the Fairy Quest. And we've done it 3 times now. We're going to be doing it for the 4th time this year at Temple Fest. And my partner Steve leads it, which is interesting because he's much less a fairy guide, but he felt called by the fairies, like, this is my devotion. So different people who've worked with fairy court entities, I won't say are possessed, but are overshadowed or more than aspected, less than possessed. And we'd station them in different places along a path that people could wander. And we basically would do sort of like a vision quest journey through the woods where people would come in with their intention and to meet the fae or to experience this realm. And we'd sort of ritually open the path. So it wasn't a circle, but it was a sacred space oblong, and people would come through that, maybe 1.5 mile territory and would encounter different aspected witches bringing the fairies through. And I won't say what happens at the end, but in the end, there's a special place for the king and queen, and people would have these really profound direct contact experiences. And strangely, when they do that, so I'm not involved in the aspecting of it, but I'm part of the self-care at the end. So I get to hear everyone's stories. And it was just fascinating to hear their stories and to feel how real and tangible and visceral it was, because not everyone's great at vision. Not everyone's great at sensing energies. But when you have someone translating for you, it was really profound. So the first time that happened was it was before we had the land. And it was at a place where one of our members very graciously donates her farm to Temple Fest for a number of years. So it was on her property. And then we've done it at a campsite where Temple Fest has happened. And then we're going to be doing a new campsite at Temple Fest this year. We've never actually done it on the land here. Our land is pretty steep, so I'd be a little concerned about people late at night tumbling down the area. But we hope to do more stuff on the land now that we're building places.
Yeah. Having been on your land, it's not someplace, if you aren't accustomed to hiking through like weird rocky like declivities and whatnot, it's not someplace I would recommend people to just go happily meander, and it would not be accessible if you aren't fairly hardy for walking parts of it anyway.
And we've had a couple open wells we've had to seal over, so you could fall into a pit. You never know.
things that just small details.
Exactly.
So your story of her presenting, like, okay, I have never told this story out loud outside of like HK stuff, and even then I think most of the new members don't even know about it. I think it was in 2000 when we were at the old townhouse. There's a lot of stuff going on. Like, this is when we were like actually like looking into registering HK as like an official religion and like actually incorporating a whole bunch of stuff. But there was so much going on. We were doing like weekly classes, so the energy was intense. And we had a member who had like kind of gone on walkabout, was really struggling. And I knew he had a lot of connections to the British Isles, to the Celtic lands. Other people didn't know about those like potential past life things. And this is relevant because a person who was sort of adjacent to us and would come over and visit and use my computer and play worms and just game and whatnot. One day is just sitting there and like the feel of the room changes. Now, mind you, he's sitting where I game, like he's just sitting in my gaming computer. And there is a sense of just something behind and over him, which is overshadowing, something that has just stepped not into his body, but is laying over him like a mantle and is much bigger and is brilliant. And I recognize this energy. It's got a very feminine feel to it, but like in a Galadriel sort of feminine way, like, all will love me in despair. And he turns, he locks eyes with me and says, "You need to send him back. He swore an oath to protect our land." And I'm like, "To be clear, I think I know who we're talking about, but please name him." And she named the person who was on walkabout with a name that this person did not know. And I was like, okay, if you can find him and convince him to like deal with his stuff, you will be doing better than me. So we're both in the same boat. He's sworn oaths to both of us. I can't help him get through his trauma. Like, help him find a therapist. Maybe that would help. But so, I mean, that sense that there was a deep alliance sworn somewhere in a misty space that is slightly beyond memory, but nevertheless profoundly binding, is one of the reasons that I like do and continue and have always worked with what I'm going to call fairies, because there isn't a better word.
Right.
And yeah, that your experience with yours reminds me of my experience with mine. She was very understanding thereafter. Oh, and this is a good segue from Lonnie. Why is the Ankh popular among vampires? So, real talk, The Hunger movie. So, a lot of things, we have a reciprocal relationship, not just vampires, but people in general, with pop culture and media. When we don't have symbols for ourselves that fit, we look to our myths and we look to our stories. And right now, in our most of our myths and our stories, our superheroes and our demigods are characters in Marvel, our characters in film, our characters in books. So when you don't have a language for what's sacred to you, you look to the stories that have meaning for you. And The Hunger with Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie, and it starts with Bela Lugosi's Dead, is like this classic, iconic moment, this turning point that like spoke to a whole bunch of folks who were in the goth vampire community, in terms of not just the idea of like what the vampire archetype represented, but also the queer aspect, the asexual, the eternal, like these weird androgynous elements. It hit a bunch of things, and they use an Ankh as their symbol because, you know, ancient Egyptian stuff, it's a symbol of life. It was a symbol that was carried only by the gods to indicate their power over life and death, which was a power that mortals did not have. But as many people will probably cheerfully say, it's like, oh, it was inspired by this, it was inspired by that. You can pretty much like definitively point, this movie happened, and then every goth on the planet really just wanted a silver Ankh. And it became sort of the thing for the vampire community as well.
Did that predate Neil Gaiman's death?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. That's amazing. Yep. That's where my guess would have been for that. So, but I love how it also crosses over in the witchcraft world, because, you know, the Ankh with the 5-petaled rose in the center of it was really big in Alexandrian Wicca, and I know my teacher had all sorts of stuff with Ankhs in it. This was probably, you know, late 80s, early 90s. So
yeah, well, yes. And the Hunger is not like the only place it was used. We all know the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn like really did a lot of like Egyptian revivalism. I don't know if we can call it Reconstructionism. Florence Farr's stuff is pretty
inspired.
It's certainly inspired. And like the sort of like Egyptian drag that they would wear. So it's got a place in occultism as a symbol, but really, truly, as someone who is steeped in the goth subculture and the early vampire subculture, which developed cheek to jowl, the Ankh is there because of its portrayal and associations from pop culture. Oh, okay. See, Lonnie's just here for it. Question for both of you. Could you share with us a time you used witchcraft, magic, or psychic skills to get out of trouble? Speeding ticket to international espionage, anything. I've got some fun ones. Do you have?
I'm trying to think, you know, trouble. I usually avoid trouble before it happens.
Yeah, no, this thing, like most of my stuff is for avoiding the trouble before anything happens.
Yeah.
The silliest one, and this was not my idea initially. Like I learned this from a fellow practitioner, little baby witch in college, was the "my car is a baked potato" spell. So he liked to speed. He had a big like Jimmy. And he would just like run the track in his head whenever he was on the highway and there might be cops around, of "my car is a baked potato," and like literally project in like intense detail a tinfoil wrapped, steaming like everything on the top baked potato just going boop, 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 down the thing instead of his truck. And the number of times that he would go zipping along at like 95 miles an hour, and like the cops would have their thing out and you'd watch them like go, and just like, like just, you could watch like the brain, like what did I just see? And they wouldn't follow the baked potato.
That's awesome.
I had a little trouble being that silly. I don't know if you've noticed, that's not my brand. So for a little while, I just tried. I just tried to be like, my car's not here. My car's not here. My car's not here. Which, consequences being what they are, after the third semi tried to pull into the spot that I was occupying on the highway, I realized that being invisible was maybe not the thing to do. So I did, in fact, go back to the baked potato approach.
I like that. I've always done the invisible to cops. I always put that as my caveat. I'm invisible to cops. Everyone else can see me. But, I got into all of this and I started such as a skeptic. So I did so much prove it to me magic, prove it to myself type of magic. So I'd say those were a little bit more than the trouble part for me, but were the very visceral ones, like going to concerts in my 20s and creating the space in a large crowd where no one was next to me. And people would notice it and be like, hey, why is no one sitting next to you? But because I don't want them to. I'm sure I'm not that tall, so I don't want people in front of me, That was one. I would say I went to school, college in a commuter school, and it had really bad parking lots and really bad resources for that. And so I was the guy who always got the parking space by the door near wherever we're going. And people would be like, oh, how'd you do that? And I learned from Lori Cabot. She'll probably joke that I'm sharing this with people, but when people in your way, when you are speeding, you had to go someplace and just kind of moving them on over, very gently, but moving them on over. And yeah, I remember my bandmates who were accepting of everything, but didn't quite believe everything, being like, you can always make them move. I was like, yeah, it's witchcraft. So very tangible things, but I wouldn't say super trouble. Generally I tend to avoid things that are troublesome before they manifest. Or at least that's my hope for it. I'm trying to think of anything that was really catastrophic that I used witchcraft to get out of, but nothing's coming to mind.
So this was more passive practice on my part. I work with a lot of spirit allies. They're all Keprian. Like in my system, they're all us. They're all like part of our bigger system. Just some of us are in bodies and some of us aren't. And notably, most of them have no chill for accompanying me on paranormal investigations. They think it's just silly and kind of beneath them, so they don't come along. And I don't ask them. Like they're just like, oh, really, please.
I'm just speaking to some of them. I get that.
Yeah, no, like when I go to the big conventions like Dragon Con, at least two of them, and always at least two, would insist on like shadowing me behind and just doing their thing. And I've learned to just be like, okay, you're doing passive protections. I'm not even going to ask. Just do your thing. Notably, this particular convention, Rosemary Ellen Guiley clocked them and asked me about who they were. And you know the convention thing, like you're there running around, like you're lugging books all over the place, and somewhere around 2:30 in the morning or 3, like you're finally like limping down to wherever you're actually staying. And in Dragon Con, it was so big that it was always like way the heck away from everything else. So I'm just trying to get to my car to put some stuff away to go back to the hotel. And where Dragon Con is held in Atlanta is potentially a questionable, like there's some stuff that can happen down there. And I just remember the two warriors, it was Cormac and Kimrick who were with me at the time, just be like, there was a path that I always took. I'm very habitual. And they were like, no. And like took me on this weird circuitous route, which I then found out that there had been a shooting at that gas station that I always went by because it was well lit. And they took me down like some shadowed fucking corners. And I was like, well, okay, I'm too tired to question it. I just don't care. And they kept me out of harm's way. Yeah, that's trust there for it. I'd say the closest thing I have to that, I was teaching in Brazil and not speaking Portuguese very well or really at all, just having a translator with me. But I got separated from some of the people that I was at and had to walk back to my hotel. And between where the restaurant was and where my hotel was some, difficult terrain. And my guide, who was just like, oh, I went to school around here, I can get us through. And we got accosted, not dangerously so, but people very handsy, and wanting their support and not knowing what was happening for, pickpocket situation or other type of violence. And just kind of with the magic, again, for me, it's the shielding and the spacing, and everyone just took a step back and they didn't know why. And he's like, what'd you do? I was like, just grabbed him by the collar and was like, we're going now. And he's like, no, what'd you do? I was like, that's the witchcraft. Yep. Just
I don't think I was in true danger, but I think it did get me out of a situation which would have been hard to get out of, because
yeah.
I think I could have had my pocket picked, or I could have been mugged at some point, but I don't think that was exactly what was going to happen, but it was enough that I needed to make that space.
Well, as someone who exists as queer in the world, like some places are more dangerous to us than others, and like that was always like something that I would clock, especially in the American South.
Yes.
Like, I'm not going to stop being me, but also I'm going to keep a weather eye out on people who are, looking to come beat my head in with a glass bottle, which, yeah, I do have more stories, but they're actually really traumatic. They all have happy endings. I would say that my personal superpower, magic wise, is to just either like charisma my way out of it, or talk my way out of it, or just like have the person just like suddenly forget what they were doing and wander off.
You're off. Yeah.
And like, again, it's not even like I'm doing a spell. It's just, this needs to happen right now.
Right. I remember us being at a convention together many, many years ago. And there was somebody there who was probably on the unethical side of vampirism and was kind of drawing from folks, and decided to get, try to be snuggly with me. And I just brought up my plant spirit ally, who's very spiky, and he fell off the couch. And then just suddenly decided I need to be someplace else, and we didn't see him for the rest of the convention. But
yeah, no, exactly that one. And there was a little clouder of like intentionally unethical vamps that like regularly people would be like, Michelle, could you please like just, and I'd do the hamster wheel, like hamster bubble. Like basically I would imagine putting them in a little, that bubble that the hamster can roll around in, and just let them roll around in their own poop for a little while until they got bored and wandered off, so they couldn't hurt anybody else. But just, it's about as invasive as I get in like public stuff. But if somebody is really obviously being terrible, I don't have a problem being proactively protective. But that's a whole thing. Oh, strong wings. Hi, I'd love to practice witchcraft, but I'm kind of afraid that witchcraft at its core is evil, so I'm afraid to start to practice it. But all my soul wants is to practice it. Do you guys have any advice?
Ooh, yeah, lots of advice.
Yeah.
I think first you sort of have to kind of deconstruct why you think it's at its core evil and why you want to practice it. I was introduced to it, as witchcraft as a holy art that was misunderstood by mainstream religion. And actually that kind of made me not want to practice it, because I was like, I just gave up one religion. I don't want another religion. But the more I got introduced to it, and the more I realized you're your own clergy, and you have the sanctity to do your own ceremonies and rituals and cleansings and all that. My mother actually was the one to talk me into it. I almost didn't go to the priesthood level of the tradition I was studying. And she's like, yeah, but you get to be your own priest. She's like, think about that before you say no. And I was like, oh, okay. But I think if you want to practice witchcraft and you feel a soul call to it, I think start with small stuff. Start with meditation, start with kind of educating yourself on some of the history and detangling what you might have as thoughts about it. I wouldn't jump into big spells to other people. I would do spells for yourself. But I would say just kind of start with the small things about getting in tune with your consciousness, getting in tune with your energy, getting in tune with your magic internally, before you think about practicing it externally. And then maybe you'll start to figure out why your soul's called to it. Maybe it's a past life thing. Maybe it's a current life thing that's enamoring you. Maybe, a lot of us come to witchcraft because we feel disempowered with what's going on in the world. And I think that can be a great reason, as long as we empower ourselves in a healthy way. But I would say explore it. If you feel called to it, even if it frightens you, I'm a big believer in all desires must be explored. Not things that will harm you, but the idea, explore why you have that desire. And if it's something you can do, see it. And I had an old Hindu teacher who used to say something that frustrated me continuously. But she'd say, if you wanted something and you got it, how great. You wanted something and you didn't get it, how great. Because in the end, it wasn't the getting it or not getting it. It was exploring why you wanted it and what that meant to your soul. So I highly, highly recommend, just taking it slow, but deeply exploring it.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is a lot of times things that we're afraid of, things that we don't understand very well, can look intimidating, and we may mistake that as dangerous or evil. Right. And that goes for, a person walking down the street who doesn't dress like everybody else, to a book or a teaching that doesn't look familiar and therefore isn't easily predicted for like what its outcomes are or what it can do for you. And again, I will echo, like, examining where is the fear coming from, and like why do you think it's evil? Are you only thinking it's evil because other people have told you that? Why do you believe that? Is it still true for you if you examine it? From Aaron, do you think it's important to know who your guides are, or is it more important to understand they are there and always guiding you, regardless of who they might be? Well, that's a poser, because I think it varies from person to person for me. And I've met people who don't really even have guides exactly. Like, there's no relationship there, and they get along just fine. And in my experience, at least, and please chime in if it's different for you, it comes down to each individual's path and where they are at, because it may change in the course of their own journey. But for some people, it's very important to know who is on the other side as their team. And for other people, it's a non-issue. And only you can answer the question for, like, why is it important to you, and why does it matter?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it depends on what your practice is too. I think a lot of people have spiritual or magical practices that have very little to do with spirits, which seems always strange to me on a personal level, because spirits are so important to me. But it's also realizing, some people may define it differently. Like, I have herbal friends that are into herbal spirits, but wouldn't call them spirits because they're very much in the herbology view of things, but they're working with spirits. And they know those plants, but they don't know necessarily their ancestors, or they don't talk to angels, or they don't talk to their what we think of as guides or allies. But for me, I'm about relationships, so it's helpful for me to know who I'm talking to, or to have an understanding of who I think I'm talking to. But I've had many students who just have a sense of, these are my guides. My guides are guiding me. I don't know who they are, but I feel direction, or I feel intuition about it, and it's not as linear or conversational. And that works really well for them. And, a lot of others just don't even work with guides in their paradigm, and that's okay too, as long as it's okay with you,
Yeah.
But I think if you're called to know them, explore it, because there's probably a reason.
I would say probably your book that I recommend the most is Spirit Allies. Like, you've got so many good ones, but the questions that come up to me, particularly Spirit Allies, is the best one. And it's the best one that covers that topic in a way that isn't just like everybody has guides. Like it's more personal. It's personalized for each person, and it allows for that. We're winding down. I'll answer one last thing, and then maybe we'll tip over, because we are at 59,720.
So close.
So close. A little less than $300 will pop us to our goal for tonight, which would be amazing. And Andrew Brian Ortiz asks, do you both have advice to get out of magical burnout? I mean, you want to go? I can go?
I would say the first thing is, like any type of burnout, you have to learn how to rest, which I'm awful at. So I totally get, why that burnout happens. From an herbal magical perspective, I've also been blessed to have a lot of really good herbalists in my life, and it's looking to adrenal fatigue, because I think magic exhausts the whole endocrine system, but particularly for me, and it might be figuring out your body type, but for me, it's the adrenal glands that get very exhausted. So whether I'm on tour, whether I've done big magical working, so to get things that are adrenal or at least endocrine support herbs has been super helpful for my magical burnout over the years. Even something just as simple as Tulsi tea is a really great one. I would take licorice root. I would take Shazandra berry is probably my favorite one, Siberian ginseng, but work with an herbalist if you feel like you've got stuff going on from your medical stuff, with your burnout stuff. If you feel like there's physical symptoms, work with somebody who maybe knows a bit of your constitution and knows the herbs pretty well. But I think resting is the biggest thing. We kind of live in a society, magically, we live in a society business-wise and career-wise and artist-wise that thinks we have to be producing content and working 70 hours a week. And as a witch, I always have to remind myself, it's okay to be fallow. It's okay to rest. It's okay to let the fields rest. It's okay to rotate crops and do something different. So I'll paint. I'll do music. It doesn't always have to be witchcraft or writing about witchcraft. But I think following those cycles and seasons and trying to find your pace, whatever it is. So for me, dark moon, I don't do anything. Not that some people say, oh, it's evil or bad, you can't do anything in the dark moon. I don't believe that at all. But the idea for me, I've just chosen that's my rest time in the monthly cycle to quell myself, but figuring out things that restore your vitality, figuring out things that rest your mind, and not pushing yourself so hard, because if you burn out, then you can't be there for the times and the people that you need.
Yep. No, I mean, keeping in mind that you were talking to two highly motivated people, a Capricorn and a Taurus, who
We
have
probably
learned
don't
the
take our own
hard way,
advice.
who have learned the hard way by falling on our faces.
Yes.
Like, I get this question from students all the time, and that fallow period is essential, and not only for witchcraft. We have this erroneous belief that is perpetuated by our culture that if we are doing something, we must always be doing it. We must be putting in the right amount of effort to do it. We must be seeing results constantly, and ideally, we should be profiting off of it. And that's just not true for anything that we do. Anything that you want to do for joy, for self, like magic is something that you live, and it is something that's part of your daily life. It is something that is happening passively around you, within you, and through you all the time. But that does not mean that you should be constantly making an effort to make magic. You should mostly be consciously making an effort to exist, to be, and that includes being still. That includes taking time to simply soak up what's going on around you and in your head without trying to take an active role in pushing or pulling or affecting things. So don't mistake practicing magic for constantly doing things like having physical results or holding a ritual or doing a spell every night. You will wear yourself out, and there's no reason to it. Even people, I learned this from my wife who was looking into getting into like extreme marathon running. Even like the most extreme marathon runners, like as they train, they take several days off. Like there's a training day and then there's multiple days off. And if you think of this as anything else, you are building up your endurance, you are doing exercise, you are doing work. You cannot improve and sustain your improvement if you don't take breaks.
Absolutely.
Really hard for some of us. Really, really hard. And also essential. Speaking of taking breaks, I think that might be a good place for us to let our voices rest and bid everyone adieu. We've been on for about an hour or so. I want to thank you, Christopher, because it's always delightful to like hang out with you. And we don't ever do it nearly as much, but we're very busy people who also, I think, have enough of a connection that like, I clock you, I know where you're at.
Yep.
And
Thank you
it's
so much
so
for having me on. I
Yeah.
do super miss seeing you. This is maybe just more hungry to come out to Ohio and visit, but yeah, I agree. We have that psychic connection. I feel like you're always there, and I know I can pick up the phone when I need you. And likewise, I hope you feel that way. And I'm just so excited for this project. So I'm hoping as we see our new scrolling numbers go by that we will meet all our goals ASAP.
And I do need to come out and see the new Willow.
Yeah, I would love that. It's actually looking so great.
Yeah.
It's a whole other story for another broadcast.
Yeah, there's many stories, many stories. But let us bid you all adieu. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us. Thank you, everyone who helped to get us closer to the goal. And please, by all means, there are so many lovely books that Christopher has put out over the years. I can't even name them all. My favorite is Spirit Allies, but that is not by any means the only one. You will probably have to populate a shelf and a half if you want them all. 2 shelves, I think, at this point. And they're all great. Yep. All right. Fare thee well, all. And take some time to rest.